day, everybody. Hope everybody is doing well. Well, I wanted to make this video to really talk about the fact that we have seen a significant shock to the economy and the job market. And no doubt that it has largely affected the foreign-born population here in the United States. I believe I've shown you this article before. Immigrants have already started to leave the United States. You can see these protests that have taken place a while back ago. Suspend immigration. This is what the president planned to do, but regardless of whether he would have done it or not, because not that many people are coming here because there's just hardly any jobs available, the foreign-born population shrank even before the order took place. And it was already declining in late 2019 and all throughout in periods of 17, 18, and 19. So we already are seeing contractions to the foreign-born population. And I don't know if this data is actually accurate. This is despite the fact we've had the caravans, despite the fact that they talk about how the economy was booming. But a lot of this is because they have certainly tightened up the requirements, the public charge rule. Certainly, they've reduced the incentives for people who are not legally to be here to stay. And not to mention, the economy is not what it used to be. The job market, the cost of living. Certainly, the highest amount of net increase was in the 1990s. That was during Clinton, which was greater than the Bush years. And the Bush years was greater than the Obama years. And the Obama years, despite the fact of all the criticism people gave him, was obviously greater than the current administration, and it was less than the Bush years as well. So I just want to make sure that people get their record straight. Now, I'll show you some data coming out from the Center for Immigration Studies. The foreign-born population is now a level of where it was in 2017. So we kind of had some surges once in a while, I think in early 2018, but overall it's pretty much flat. And you have to keep in mind that much of our population growth, and you can see how he started the ban to Muslim majority countries, that includes Iran, the country that my parents come from, and believe it or not, because of the travel ban, some of my relatives cannot come and visit here, so as a result I haven't seen them in a long time. We'll have to see if I can. We'll have to see, is the president going to change? Is he going to get a second term? But the number of foreign-born immigrants is the same level as it was in the last several years. And what you got to keep in mind is that that is our main source of population growth, which I'll show you in an article pretty soon. So as they talk about, they use this crisis to spread as anti-China sentiment. And they talk about the frontline healthcare workers, many of whom are immigrants. Of course, you can argue it's created anti-China sentiment, sure, but nevertheless, you also got to keep in mind, though, it did originate in China. And there were some people that did come from China and did spread the disease. I mean, we did have the CES show here back in January. And so they put the ban in China on February 2nd. So this shows you at least the president was doing something about it before it really became mainstream. It expanded to Iran with more restrictions on the 29th. And then, just to be fair, even though they admit that it's not as xenophobic as they claim to be, or biased, it expanded to European countries, followed by Canada and Mexico. So I guess there really isn't so much of a bias as this article says. And seasonal workers abroad who are facing visa delays and high travel costs with little or no health insurance coverage did not enter the country as planned. So this is one of the things. So a lot of people may want to come to the U.S. because they want to take advantage of our healthcare system or vice versa. Central American and Asian immigrant communities had the largest one-month drops. And as you know, that's our largest source of immigrants and population growth here in the Las Vegas Valley. And it's not just the U.S., the third largest city in China, that there was about 30,000 foreigners left in the city. That is down from 86,000. So really we're starting to see the effects of population growth and arrivals and departures all over the world. Many countries stopped processing visas on arrival and suspended visa-free entry for certain people. The global immigration slowdown is temporary, but how governments react, it could have a lasting effect. Germany has arranged flights for seasonal farm workers from Eastern Europe. Portugal granted temporary citizenship rights to immigrants and asylum seekers. And you can see here it's being affected all over the world. But remember, it is not just how the government policy, it's also the economy. And now we've got about 35, 45, could be 55 million Americans that are out of work that just got out recently. This is going to be pretty shocking. And why is this also very, very important? Well, as you know, in the US, our main source of population growth is immigration along with their children that are going to be born, not US born people actually having children. And this is what this article really shows you right here. So immigration accounted for a large segment of the population growth in 2018. And just these numbers are really impressive. Keep in mind though, the fact that you see immigrant levels changing, it also has an impact on remittances, because these are the people, and I'm going to show you in a future article, that literally have family members in foreign countries and they depend on those remittances. And I've talked about this in a video about several weeks ago. Don't mean to keep parroting, but I have to remind people. And you can see here the darker green shades have the highest international migration. So a lot of people think that these Sunbelt states like Florida, Georgia, Texas, Arizona, these are the states that are having these very high population growth because people are moving from the colder states to these warmer states. Some people are moving to Texas and Florida to take advantage of their economy, their tax climates, but in reality, a lot of the growth is also due to immigration. And I know a lot of people are concerned because it can also have the effect on elections. This is where people can argue where Texas and Arizona is turning more blue. And you can also argue why California becomes more crazy than ever, because a lot of people who would traditionally fight back against Sacramento, they move out and they get a brand new set of voters, and these immigrants continue to support or don't stand up against the policies of Newsom and Jerry Brown, etc., Feinstein, Pelosi, not to mention it pumps a lot of economic growth, GDP, more jobs, so it makes their numbers look good. You see, you got to understand, there's a lot of special interests, cheap labor, lawyers, developers, because they depend on the labor and more people to buy homes, whether it's law firms, people who depend on new voters and agendas. All of that depends on immigration. This is the main reason why we have it. And it's important to know, the main reason why I have a problem with immigration is not the immigrants. Keep this in mind. Although, yeah, there are concerns about them. There are valid reasons. It's the people that are benefiting. They're the people who literally are in charge of our policies, who are using it against us and are neglecting our needs. That is the number one problem, folks. This is the number one issue. So when you get upset, when you get concerned, you need to be upset at the system, the people in charge, not mainly the people who are foreign born. Because just this divide and pushiness strategy is not really helping you that much. As a matter of fact, it can arguably help the establishment. People moving from other countries made up almost half of the U.S. population growth in 2018. Despite the fact I just showed you in my last chart, we didn't see a lot of immigrant growth in those years, especially now compared to earlier in that decade. The entire added 2 million people in 2018, the nation, with 1 million or so coming from the natural increase where births exceed deaths. Now keep in mind though, a lot of those births disproportionately are from immigrants, including people who are not legally here, considering the fact you've got a lot of anchor babies, which anchor babies give them the opportunity to basically get benefits and decrease their chances of deportation. That's where they talk about this whole family separation thing. And another, somewhere about 970,000 moved to the 50 states. A lot of them were from Puerto Rico, a still recovering island that lost 130,000 in population in the past year. Texas and Florida made up 1/3 of the U.S. population growth in this country. The population grew about 379,000, while Florida grew about 322,000. I think a lot of that is certainly because of the fact that you've got a warmer climate, retirees, but again, there's a lot of job growth, and immigrants tend to usually move to the states where there's a lot of job growth. New York and Illinois, obviously, they got the lowest population growth, where they lost a lot of people, about 50,000. It's no surprise, and I think it's getting worse right now considering the COVID outbreak and how they're handling it. And West Virginia and Louisiana also saw some population drops. Now it's pretty interesting that Louisiana not only got hit hard by this pandemic, but their economy has really been struggling since Katrina. But considering the fact that Louisiana, depending on how you look at it, has more interesting culture, more beauty than Texas, has been really struggling economically. And I think because of their cities like Shreveport and New Orleans has just so much problems with poverty and crime, a lot of people are not moving there. And many U.S. residents, like I've told you, are still moving to Florida with a net domestic gain of 132,000 people. But international growth was higher from U.S. citizens from Puerto Rico, from 175,000 folks. For such state, Florida's natural increase is a low at 13,000 because of the high retirees that move there. So again, they're not having a lot of births, but they're having a lot of people that die because a lot of people want to go to these communities like, I think, the Villages. Correct me if I'm wrong. For the large metros, Dallas-Fort Worth saw the largest numeric growth with 131,000, 1.8%, followed by Phoenix with an increase of 2%. And by the way, I don't know about you, but I don't think these are horrible places, but I think they're really overrated. I don't think they really have much to offer. I think certainly Las Vegas has a lot more to offer than Phoenix in terms of benefits, outweighing costs. And I certainly like the southeast part of the country, North Carolina, Georgia, better than I do Texas. Certainly, it's a lot more beautiful and attractive in many ways. The Miami-West Palm Beach Metroplex stands out because it's losing residents to other regions at a rapidly growing rate as it struggles with traffic congestion and high housing costs. Now, as you know, you've got one side, which is the ocean. You have the other side, which I believe it's protected area, so it makes sure that land availability is a lot more scarce. So I think a lot of people are moving to like the northern parts of the states, heading towards Orlando. And they lost 51,000, but yet they had international migration of 60,000 coming in. And this is one of the reasons why immigration control is very important, because you have areas like Miami, especially like California, that are having population growth, they're having housing problems. So the last thing we need is more people to jam things up. This is one of the best arguments you can make with immigration along with remittances. You can see Brooklyn is booming economically, but saw their population drop by $13,000. They have high costs. They had a negative domestic migration of 46,000, while 12,000 moved from Puerto Rico. Now, just imagine if they didn't move in. Look how the housing costs would have ended up. And we're going to see a lot of that in the coming years. Palm Beach County saw positive migration. And the analysis released Thursday said about 1 in 10 counties grew in the fiscal year that ended last June primarily because of immigration, as new arrivals are shaping as the population ages as the birth rate slows. Well, look, come on. We don't have to rely on foreigners to jack up our GDP and our population. Just encourage Americans to have more children, for heaven's sakes. The Orlando area boomed but most urban part of it, Orange County, saw a domestic decline. And then one county saw a large inflow of Hispanic people. The county grew about 4.3%. So it added 4,300 in domestic migration, and it had a lot of international migration. So again, a lot of this population growth deeply benefits the establishment, the builders. It makes themselves look good. This is one of the reasons why we had it. And this is one of the reasons why there was such a law being pushed for the Hart-Celler Act. And you got to understand, immigration, the welfare system, corporations, this gender destruction, family decline, all of that is all tied together since a lot of it started in the 1960s. So pretty interesting stuff when you take a look at it. Now this is another article I wanted to tell you about, and coronavirus wreaks havoc on the future of U.S. immigrant labor. And let's take a look at this article. He lost his job at a restaurant in downtown Washington that provided steady income and job security for 15 years. Now the bistro has closed, and guess what? She's not receiving a paycheck, and her pre-virus earning potential may not. Because again, a lot of these businesses, they're not going to be the same. This is why it's very important to know, because when you look at these high immigrant infested places like casinos, especially here in Las Vegas, a lot of these culinary members are not going to get their job back. I think probably maybe 20 or 40%, something like that, could be hired back, and they're going to be jobless, and it's pretty likely that they will leave Las Vegas. And because it's a voting power structure, this could have a significant impact on the election. We'll get to that later on. We've been told that each of us may only be needed for 1 or 2 days a week, who typically work 5, because these businesses are struggling. They don't have the money to pay for the labor. They're not having the customer base. There's a lot of reports showing that food prices are basically struggling right now. And they're not as, cheap as they used to be. You can see here, GDP is falling down. Now, this is a chart I wanted to show you real quick, and it's disproportionately hit millions of immigrants that they want to return to hotels and office buildings. But there's a lot of depressing parts about this, because it really shows you how flawed our immigration system really is. Because the thing is, these immigrants have disproportionately taken low-skilled jobs. And who does that hurt the most? Particularly people like African Americans, young people the most. This is why millennials should be very concerned about this. But no, they're being brainwashed, and oh no, this is good. Diversity is wonderful. You got to just shove in as many people as you can. Even though these are opportunities that could have been given to young people, folks. I have these gig jobs, and a lot of immigrants, I've told you in a previous video or two, they're taking them as well, although that's not my main job. And you can see these high rates, and is it really necessary that they're having a high portion? Look at this, manicurists, 78%. Why do we have 78% of people working in nail salons are foreign born? Americans can learn how to do those jobs, for heaven's sakes. You have a lot of young women that are spending tens of thousands of dollars going to school, not learning a skill. You can teach them how to do those kinds of jobs. But they're going to school, God knows if they're learning something effective. They're getting out of debt. How very depressing. Maids in homes. Look, you can argue some jobs a lot of Americans don't want to do, agricultural sorters. But first of all, the question is, are they all legally here? And the other thing is, could you do a work visa program? Hotel maids, 52%, building janitors, 41%. Now, it's really hard for me to believe that Americans don't want to do those jobs, because you have a high underemployment rate and you have a declining factor relative to 50, 60 years ago, as percentages of Americans who are American born between the ages of 16 to 64 who are in the labor force. And I'll show you that chart in a future video, but it's hard for me to believe that no American born, or not that many, would want to do those jobs. This is really the myth that you have to keep in mind. Look at this. Food processors are 39%. Chefs and head cooks, 38%. A very large portion of them work in these casinos around here. But total workforce presence is 17%. And this is one of the reasons why I agree with many people out there, including our president, that we need a merit system. That we need a system that's even across the board. Low-skilled, medium, and high-skilled employees. With the exception of H-1B visas. Over time, the very nature of work some of the immigrants likely to do is change as business enforces social distancing and requirements. And by the way, I want to make this very, very clear. The public charge rule certainly is going to have an impact. And don't forget, technology is going to have a large, large impact as well. Especially when machines are going to come in, 3D printers are going to take over the construction industry. Because I know my most viewed video talking about all these construction defects, that's going to be a game changer pretty soon when you've got these boxable units or these 3D printers that's going to come along. Meat workers, the backbone of the food supply chain, toil in close quarters, and at least 30 have died of the coronavirus, with more than 10,000 infected and exposed. And this is one of the main reasons why, along with people buying so much and storing, why food prices have been going up. The reduced job opportunities combined with the Trump's hardline policies mean the number of immigrants who are not legally here are likely to tumble. So even with all the stimulus checks, with Gavin Newsom, and again, he's only giving to about like $150,000, $500. That's not enough. And they're likely to take that money and send it abroad. They're likely to leave the country. So they're about 5% of the employment, but a lot of people argue it's much higher, especially here in Nevada, despite the fact we have hardly any fields and farms out here. They contribute about 3% of the gross domestic product annually and account about 5% of employment. Well, that's not a good, attractive statistic. According to a 2016 paper by the National Bureau of Economic Research, removing them would cost the economy about $5 trillion a year. Oh, boo-hoo. So yeah, our GDP is going to come down. Well, guess what? What about our standard of living? What about wages? What about cost of living? What about taxes? They're not telling you this. That's the most important thing about the economy. These articles, these sources, especially one from Bloomberg. Come on, Bloomberg, yeah. You can't trust these people. They're giving you partial truth. These immigrants face a double hit of unemployment and a lack of social safety net programs. Hard to believe because their U.S.-born children can access them as anchor babies, including the government stimulus checks that they're handing out. A lot of these people are out of work. They can't pay their rent. They don't have health insurance. They can't get government checks. The U.S. labor market is in the harshest downturn in history. They cut about 20 to 30 million new jobs. The unemployment rate is essentially about 15%, the Great Depression era of the 1930s. And I know a lot of Trump people are very optimistic it's going to change. I am not as much because I think it's going to really hit the housing market and this is going to create a domino effect. Although, no, I'm not doom and gloom. I'm not scaring people like the dollar's going to collapse and you're going to have to buy gold. No, I'm not one of those people. I think in shades of gray. The initial losses were concentrated in low-wage labor from hospitality, retail restaurants, where many of them are employing these immigrants. Well, come on, E-Verify, find the employers. Trump suspended visas for the last 60 days to limit competition for jobs. And of course, I think housing is very important. And the people who are crossing fell fewer than $17,000. And they're doing all these health checks. And here's the good news to a lot of people. They're leaving for home. There are signs that some immigrants are already deciding to leave. Those from Mexico sent family and friends a record $4 billion in remittances in March. But that partially reflects the repatriation of savings by people who lost hope of their job prospects in the U.S. and plan to go home. So they're losing a lot of savings and they're leaving home, and now their economies are basically in shambles. Wow, there's going to be a lot of crazy stuff happening in those Latin American and Asian countries. Holy shamoly. And they should learn from my family. Like my cousin, he's like a few years older than me. He was actually getting money from Tehran, the other way around. We should have more immigrants like that. Why are we pumping up these foreign countries? I guess they deserve it. They should learn their lessons. Competing for our jobs, and a lot of that money goes abroad. Don't give me this notion that they're contributing to our economy. Not as much as people who are born in the United States overall, per person. It could be a sign that more and more people at least are temporarily giving up their future here. In the longer term, remittances is expected to drop as immigrants who remain in the U.S. deal with the virus impact on the job market. The World Bank forecasts a record 20% decline. I see a lot more in transfers to low and middle income countries, which, like I said, it's going to get ugly. There could be riots. There could be a lot of different problems. Although I don't think these countries have those kinds of personal credit card debts like we have here. Keep that in mind, because the U.S. economy is largely propped up by these low interest rates, low lending standards of credit and debt. But although I'm going to show you articles in future, like I've had in previous videos, they're changing their requirements. So 53 years old, legal permanent resident, she's reduced 1/3 of her money, usually she sent to her mother in El Salvador, because she's uncertain about her job. Yeah. And we want to make these people citizens. They're not loyal to the United States. They don't care about you. And it's likely by the time when they hit elderly age, they're probably going to move back, because their savings and their standard of living is going to certainly be much better. She started cooking for food for her back porch, with cheese and pork to sell with her friends and neighbors. So they're just doing what they can, but still, it's not good enough. David Perez, 43, has struggled to pay the bills. In a flea market where he sells leather goods in native Mexico, shut down in March. He already lost his car because he couldn't make his payments. The single father hasn't paid his $1,100 mother in rent, the home, and guess what? He's wondering how he can afford it. Perez's daughter, 14-year-old Maria, has trouble keeping up with school because her father cannot afford internet at home. There you go, double whammy. Although it's really hard to believe. I mean, you can find a place, you go on your phone, get Wi-Fi, and get something out of it. I mean, that's what I would certainly do. And by the way, I'm thinking more and more people are going to rely less on internet. They can just get free service from, these 5G networks. I could be wrong. He has halted cash transfers to put food on the table and to help out the family. Well, but it's really good to see this breaking part, because it's really not helping us Americans, and I've thought about leaving. I'm gonna need to return. Well. And I guess this is what a lot of people like us and the president have thought about. Just take away the incentives and they will leave. Now let's take a look at the Hill article. Immigration reform after COVID-19. So you can see right here, believe it or not, the Hill is still promoting immigration reform. I think likely that they want to give some legalized illegal immigrants. Look, I don't want to read this article. It's just, I mean, why should we legalize them? They're not loyal to the United States. And I know every one of them is different. Maybe some of them have an excuse to be here. Maybe they had bad lawyers or something. But come on. I don't trust news media outlets like this. President Trump has essentially closed the immigration system response to the crisis, with a few exceptions for some guest workers. And I will say, I don't like these guest worker programs the president is still perpetuating. So there's a lot of things I don't agree with the president. However, many people in the administration want to close up even those few exceptions because of the corona recession. The president will not reopen the rest of the immigration system until the threat is subsided. When that occurs, reopening immigration will provide a good opportunity for much needed reform, but new ideas are needed. The Cato Institute, new ideas, yeah. They're written by immigration policies. And by the way, I don't trust the Cato Institute. Let me tell you something. Koch and Soros are probably one of the most dangerous people. If you want to have good views about how to run things, believe in things that's the opposite of them. They're not supporting Wall Street regulation. They're not supporting limited immigration. They're not supporting restrictive trade policies, fair trade deals. The things that they support, be wary of them, and they usually mean trouble. Koch and Soros, they're really part of the divide in this country and so much what's wrong with our society. The think tank state fund, just so much BS. Whether Soros funds Antifa or the Koch hijacked the Tea Party. And they're talking about essentially legalizing illegal immigrants, increasing lawful immigration. For what? So we have more competition, we have more remittances. Give me a break. Again, these billionaires, they want cheap labor. We legalized in 86 amnesty, which is one of the reasons why I don't think Reagan was really a good president. And immigration shot afterwards, but there was no improvement to the legal system. Look, I don't know about you, but I don't think a lot of these illegals want to be legals, because I don't think they allow dual citizenship. They just want to get the welfare from their children, and they want to strip those dollars and send it abroad. And the fact that the US dollar has its value and it's the world's reserve currency, this is the main reason why we've been getting all of these people coming in. Creating a better and more legal immigration pathways is only the way to reduce illegal immigration while substantially create a sense of fairness and predictability in our complex immigration system. I just don't really buy into it. You got to have essentially restrictions. You cannot let 800 million people come to the United States, for heaven's sakes, especially with the management that we have in this country. So I'm not going to really get down to this article, as you can see, but those of you, and I know a lot of people, you guys are very, very much concerned with immigration, is mainly due to the demographics. And there are reasonable excuses to be concerned about demographics. I get it. You want to be in a society where people are like you. Japanese people don't want their societies to change. I get it. But the main reason for demographic change, which I will tell you, and a lot of you guys are fans of Jared Taylor and all these groups out there, it is the birth rates. You folks have the power to change that. And if you want things to change, you're going to have to change this. You have to jack up your birth rates. And certainly, you have to make sure that it matches these high levels that we saw during the baby boom years. Because remember, all these other groups are outperforming people of European descent. All right. Now, of course, the other thing is it's going to be hard to stop interracial marriages. But you can see here it's 11 years. This is from 2018. So if you subtract 11, it's 2007. So I guess a lot of them were coming here and throwing their children here. You basically get the idea. So it is really up to the birth rates. That's what we should be focusing on. And as you can see here, U.S. birth rates fall to a record low, decline in childbearing. And there's a lot of reasons for this. People don't like the court system, the quality of men and women, our values, people focusing too much on school, on work, cost of living, student loan debt, a lot of different factors. Online dating. Certainly if I was going to do online dating, I'd rather just, I don't know, let my stock market investments go up so much and then I can go on these millionaire dating apps, because then you don't have to deal with all this useless artificial competition out there. I'll talk about that in another video. And then you see on this article right here, it says low birth rates may cost Social Security $3 trillion. This is one of the biggest problems. This is one of the reasons why people want abortion levels to come down, because they need more and more people to basically support the elderly. But what we have to do is we have to encourage a society to increase our birth rates so we don't have to rely on foreigners to increase our population along with their children to supplement support and population for our elderly. So we don't have to become like Tokyo, for heaven's sakes. And this is a topic that I'm going to be talking about in a future video. But But again, a lot of the problems with Social Security isn't just the birth rates. A lot of it is just the hijacking. A lot of people argue in the 1980s where they basically sort of protected and gave exemptions to the rich people. And boomers retiring is far from the Social Security's only problem. So you let me know what you think. And I know these immigrant levels are certainly encouraging. The question is, will it also have an effect on our election levels? And speaking of immigrants, where a lot of people like to complain about immigration, you can see right here, the president has called out Cegavske's mail-in ballot votes. Now, what's really, really shocking is that Cegavske, here in Nevada, the Secretary of State, she was the only Republican that won in 2018. And Rob Lauer talks about, which, again, I don't trust a lot of these people, but he claims that about 200,000 active voters, mostly dead illegal aliens or people who never existed, are now being sent mail-in ballots. And 360 did a story about a woman who passed away 4 years ago, but received a ballot for both her and her husband. Nevada failed to remove the voters into the system. Now, from my story, I put in 2 T's for some reason in my name, and they didn't even check my last name, even though my last name only has 1 T. So this just shows you how accurate the system is. Now, it seems our president is reading this news media outlets, and he talks about, well, the state of Nevada thinks that they can send the illegal vote and mail-in ballots, creating great voter fraud scenario for the state and the U.S. They can, and if they do, I can hold up funds for the state, but you cannot cheat for elections. And we have to really, really see if we're going to get voter ID. So I think President Trump has really understand the Reid machine, just the sham, and not to mention it's not just the manipulation, it's also the mega campaign donors that goes to both parties from the casinos, whether you got Sheldon Adelson, Jim Murren, pumping voters, busing them in with the Culinary Union, the real estate sector, all these different interests. This is why more and more I think these elections are not what they are, they're actually selections. So it's great to see that the president has talked about this, and hopefully something can get done. We'll have to see once again how the general will turn out. I did hear from former Assemblyman, congressional candidate Jim Marchant that the primaries are just basically done. We'll have to see how the general turns out. And speaking of President Trump, as you can see here, according to Fox News, although I don't trust a lot about what they say, including their polls, Trump leads in key battleground states. I believe that does include Nevada, Maine, all these other states, Maine, New Mexico, Colorado, so forth. But then he leads nationally. Oh, give me a break. They said those things about, obviously, Hillary Clinton in 2016, and we saw how that really, really turned out. And of course, they do rig it against other Democrats too, as we've seen with Bernie Sanders. So anyway, you guys let me know what you think. Do you like this news that just have come out? I'm glad to see them call them out. I'm sick and tired of these sellout politicians betraying us, getting away with schemes and all of that. And I know they're doing what they can to basically rig the system. Because again, we don't know what they can stuff in. We don't know if they count the votes. So thank you guys so much. If you like this content, please share, subscribe to this channel, and I'll have more updates to come. See you.